Dr. Sy Garte. It's very nice to have you. Very nice to meet you. Welcome to Let's Parent on Purpose.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I have a lot of different interviews. I got to admit, this was one that's kind of an excuse to just answer my own questions, and now everybody else gets to come in together. You have a pretty unique life story and background story. We're going to talk about what you share in your book, Beyond Evolution, today, but would you care to share a little bit about your personal journey? Because I know you were once an atheist and are now a Christian biochemist. So would you care to share a little bit about that journey?
Sure. I was once an atheist because that's how I was brought up. I didn't deconvert at any point. I had absolutely no experience with religion of any kind. My parents and my grandparents, all going back, this goes back 2 generations, were atheists and communists. My parents were members of the American Communist Party in the 30s. And when I grew up, I didn't know anything about God other than there's no such thing. And Christianity was evil. It was a tool of the capitalist class to oppress workers, all the communist dogma. Mm-hmm. So I had no interest or understanding or experience of anything spiritual. I was sure that the world was all explainable by materialistic philosophy, physics, chemistry. And my father was also a scientist, and so I had a lot of that influence as well. He was a chemist. So that's how I started out. And what happened was learning the reality of physics kind of put a dent in that, because physics is not purely materialistic. When you start trying to learn about quantum theory, things don't make a lot of sense. And everybody agrees on that. It's true, but it doesn't fit with a materialistic view. So I got very confused. I didn't understand that. And there were a lot of things that confused me about, why Christianity was supposed to be so bad. I didn't really get it. So I started. I'm a boomer, so this was during the 60s, and there was a lot of New Age stuff going on. People were looking into spirituality in various ways, and I kind of did that too. I looked into Buddhism and biofeedback. I don't even remember all the things that were going on, but none of that really excited me. But I was kind of searching for something because, quite frankly, I felt there was something lacking in my life. And you'll hear this from a lot of people who were brought up the way I was. Spirituality, I think, is central to a human existence. Mm-hmm. And people who don't have it end up looking for it, and sometimes in bad places, but it's needed. It's not enough to just say, well, I understand the world and it's very simple and here it is and everything makes sense. That'd be nice if it were true, but it's clearly not true. And so I was searching around. I didn't know what to do. And I got some exposure to religious ideas from a few books. Teilhard de Chardin I read. That was interesting, but, very mystical. And that's kind of intrigued me. But what really happened, and I don't think we have time to go into detail, but I do describe it in my first book, mm-hmm. The Works of His Hands. I had some dreams that were very strange, and those dreams, I later realized, were a direct interposition from the Holy Spirit coming and, trying to do something with me, trying to save my soul, I guess. And I didn't know what they meant. I was very confused. Eventually, I did meet some Christian people, and one of them brought me to a church. I was in my 40s, and I had never been inside a house of worship before. and I was quite nervous. It was a Catholic church, and I had heard horrible things about Catholics, and but I loved the service. I mean, the priest was great. The people were very friendly. Nobody threw any stones at me, and it was wonderful. So I began thinking a little more about this possibility. I couldn't believe the idea of believing in a God who was, hard. You couldn't pin it down. Seemed like just a superstition to me. But I was interested in the whole idea of it, and I began reading the New Testament. I tried looking at the Old Testament. I couldn't get very far. Mm-hmm. But I read the book of Matthew, and that really kind of blew me away. And then I read the book of Acts, which I realized was history. It wasn't made up. And then I started thinking about this whole thing of Jesus. I actually became a Christian before I became a theist, because it was Jesus that grabbed me. It was the character of this man, this human being who was also God, which didn't make sense at first, but then I realized it does. That person was saying things that nobody else had said ever, and doing things that were completely revolutionary. And I grew up believing in revolution, right? So the most revolutionary person in history was Jesus Christ, it turns out. And so I got interested in that, but I couldn't believe in it because it was still, I was just not able to get over that threshold of saying, okay, I'm going to throw all my scientific training away and just go with this mystical creature called Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so it took several more years, but at one point I had a waking experience with the Holy Spirit, who inspired me. I was by myself in my car, and the Holy Spirit inspired me to preach a sermon to myself. And I did. And it was not anything I would have thought I would have said. Some of the words came, I was sure it came from outside of me. I had never thought of these things. And the basic idea of the sermon was that Jesus Christ must love everyone because I know he loves even me.
Wow.
And if that's true, then who could he not love? And when I had said those words in my sermon, I broke down crying. I mean, really broke down. Luckily, I had pulled the car over, wasn't driving anymore, and I felt this amazing, just indescribable sense of joy and relief that just washed over me. And I've heard other people say very similar things after that. And I said out loud, I believe. And that was it. And I've never even thought of or imagined of going back because I was born again. I mean, I didn't know what that meant until I was. And then, I was born again. I was a new creature as soon as I could confess my belief in Jesus.
It's it's amazing how God used both intellectual stimulation and then just pure work of the Spirit.
Absolutely.
To bring you. So after your conversion to Christ, did you feel any kind of like moral struggle? You're in this scientific world.
Right.
I think you're training as a PhD biochemist.
Correct.
Which doesn't tend to be a hotbed of religious fervor. So did you feel some kind of moral struggle of like, how am I going to keep doing what I do? Or were you like, okay, tell me about that a little bit.
Yes, I did. I didn't see, I had, as you said, I had come to Christ through a spiritual awakening. I knew very little about Christianity. I only knew that I believed that Jesus was who he said he was, that he's the Messiah, that he's God incarnate, and that he is our Savior. That's not very much.
Hmm.
I didn't know. I didn't know any other scientists who were Christians. I thought. Turns out that's not true. There were many, but I didn't
Oh,
know they were Christians. And I didn't know. What do I do now? Join a church? I mean, how do you do that? And I knew about baptism, but how do I do any of this stuff? And I actually kept it quite quiet for several couple of years, 2 or 3 years. I didn't tell very many people about this. And you're right about the I was a professor, and the academic environment is not friendly to Christianity at all,
mm,
to say the least. And many scientists are not really terribly interested either. Although I will say that there's a slight misunderstanding about scientists and faith. It's true that most scientists are not people of faith, but they are not like the Richard Dawkins type who
right.
is
Yeah.
absolutely, there are very few, there are some, but it's not the majority of scientists. Most of them, their attitude is mostly, I don't know, I don't care, I'm too busy, leave me
Hmm.
alone.
Okay.
I'm doing my research, I'm writing papers and grants. I don't want to think about this.
Hmm.
They're not actively hostile, at least that in my experience. Some are, but not the majority. So it took me a long time to know what to do next. And again, I was helped not just by the Holy Spirit, but by people.
Hmm.
And I did eventually go to a church. It was a Methodist church in my neighborhood. I didn't know anything about Protestant denominations. I had heard of some of them, but I didn't know what they were. I didn't know anything about them. And anyway, at this church, I heard a great sermon, and I went back another week, and the pastor asked me about myself, and I said I'm looking to. I recently came to faith. I'm looking to get baptized, and I was baptized a week later. So,
Hmm.
and I haven't missed a Sunday. Well, I may have missed a couple, but that was 12 years ago, and
Wow.
I had a elder position at the church. I was the lay leader, which is a high position in the Methodist Church for lay members.
Okay.
So yeah, that's how it happened. Through the grace of God and through the wonderful grace of so many Christians who have been nothing but wonderful to me along this path. And that includes my books. I wrote my first book and published it, The Works of His Hands. It was published when I was 72. And this third one, now about to turn 78. So, I've been busy in my retirement.
That's great. Yeah. Well, speaking of books, we're going to spend the rest of our time diving into. Actually, I have a copy for the 7 of you watching on YouTube. Beyond Evolution, which I'm going to give some caveats at the beginning because this podcast for Christian moms and dads, and I understand. I would assume probably the majority of my audience would be what we would call young Earth creationists, and there are old Earth creationists in there. This is not a podcast about that, and I
Right.
have read through this entire book, and I want to just say, whatever your belief about the age of the Earth, two things: there are committed, God-fearing, born-again Christians that believe both ways, and number two, this book will help equip you and encourage you about the divine wonder of God, whatever your belief is. So you are an evolutionary biologist, that as I read this book, it didn't, I don't feel like the purpose of the book was to convince me of the age of the Earth or any of that stuff.
Right.
You talk about something deeper than evolution that we all need to understand. And so my first question to you is, many people hear the word evolution, especially parents, in their kids' classrooms as if it disproves God. And so
Mhm.
how would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question because, yes, you're absolutely right. there is a crazy idea in the culture today that, well, I guess it came from Richard Dawkins, who said evolution allows me to be a intellectually fulfilled atheist.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. Atheism has nothing to do. I'm sorry, evolution has nothing to do with atheism. It's a fairly minor biological theory about how life forms diversified and developed over time. And there's nothing about it that contradicts Genesis, even. Now, when I say that, people get very surprised because they'll say, well, wait a minute. Genesis says God created according to their kinds. And yes, and that phrase is critical. And as I mentioned in the book,
Mm-hmm.
it's not about evolution or not evolution. What that phrase is about is the biological fact that has been known for almost ever, that every animal only and always gives birth to its own kind.
Mm-hmm.
And that phrase, according to their kind, is repeated, I believe, 20 times in Genesis 1.
Huh.
So it's an important idea. And what it's telling us is that it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with evolution. What it's telling us is that all living beings have this amazing ability to pass on their characteristics to their offspring, whether it's a plant or an animal or a cell or a fish or a person. That's called inheritance. And nothing else. In other words, we life, not just us, but all life, is able to make highly accurate replicates of ourselves. Every cell that divides into two cells, every bacterium that divides into two bacteria, those bacteria are 99.9999% the same as the original parent.
Mm-hmm.
And only life does this. Nothing else does. There's no accurate self-replication outside of life. Now, people have said to me, well, what about crystals? Crystals make copies of themselves. Yeah, they do when they get very large and they break, then you have two crystals. But they're not accurate self copies. They're the two copies that break off are not exactly the same. And I discussed this in some detail in the book, and I describe a paper that was published, which actually it says the words, there's more mutation than replication when a crystal breaks.
Huh.
So in other words, you get different fragments, they look
Right.
different. And once you lose that highly, highly accurate self-replication, you cannot have evolution. The whole idea of evolution depends on the inheritance according to their kind.
And so that is one of the strongest points that you're getting across, is that at least to the layperson, and I would consider myself a layperson, having I went to public school, so I had biology and science in public school. Before I went to a Christian school, I did all of my chemistry and biology and physics classes at a military school, but it was a secular university. And the way that I remember it being presented was that evolution is at the bottom. Like, evolution is the foundational principle of life. And it's like, I'm not a scientist, but just common sense wise, that it never made sense to me.
It doesn't.
And you make this strong case that inheritance is far more foundational than evolution, because unless you have inheritance, you can't have evolution.
That's right.
Do you feel like inheritance is at the very bottom of all of that?
Yeah, we know how inheritance works. And that's what's in the appendix.
Uh-huh.
If people are really interested, they can look at all the technical details. But I do describe the immense complexity of how every living thing has the same mechanism, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
to make copies of itself, and that has to do with making proteins, just the right proteins. And it's incredibly complex. There's no way it could have arisen spontaneously. Nobody thinks that. Some people think, well, it must have evolved. No, it can't evolve because you need it before you can have evolution. You can't evolve unless you have very, very accurate inheritance. And I've actually shown that in a paper with mathematical proof. So, and I'm not the only one. Other people have as well. So, yeah, the point is that evolution is what you said is absolutely right. You will, if you go to most universities now and you want to major in biology, there's no such thing. What you can major in is molecular biology or evolutionary biology. So evolutionary biology is everything else other than molecular biochemistry. Yeah. So that includes, zoology, plants, everything about how life flourishes, ecosystems, all that. That's all covered under evolution as if that's the key thing. It doesn't make any sense because, and I think what this is a reaction to perhaps, I don't know, it may be a reaction to people who don't like evolution, who think it's anti-biblical. And so the academic world is saying evolution is everything. Okay, if you don't believe in evolution, you're an idiot, you're stupid, etc. It's all false because evolution is not that important. I happen to believe, in a limited sense, that evolution occurs, that it's real. I don't think it applies to everything. It has nothing to do with the origin of life, which I discuss in the book. And I don't think it has anything to do with the existence of humanity. I think it stops before there, and it started after life began. So it's a fairly limited thing. And as I said several times now, it depends on something else, which is reproduction according to the kind.
So there are two analogies that you use that were really helpful for me. And we'll do one and then we'll do the other. And hopefully I won't remember the other while we're doing the one. One of them was you were talking about code and you use this analogy. You said like the word tree, TREE. So you think about that, like at one time on the planet, the word tree did not exist.
Right.
And for the word tree in the English language to have to exist, you have like the English language has to be invented. And then somebody comes up with an alphabet, like the way to write each letter, and then it's put together. But when we look at the word tree, like that actual physical TREE literally has nothing to do with an actual tree.
Exactly.
But when I read it, I automatically know tree. Like I don't think car, I don't think bus, I think tree. So think about the literal word tree. It's a code for an actual thing, a tree.
Yes. Right.
And this is, if I'm correct, this is how you describe what's happening inside DNA.
Yes.
You have those four molecules. Is it ADTP?
ACGT.
Hey man, I got two of them right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So you have these four molecules. And for instance, none of these molecules are an eyeball.
Right.
But when something in this cell reads these molecules in a certain sequence and certain order, it has instructions to manufacture all of the various cellular pieces and put them together to make an eyeball. So
perfect. Very well done. Yes.
All right. I read the book.
Good for you.
Very slowly and over again. And so you have, before any evolution can happen, this phenomenally complex code and the ability to read the code, which has to be outside of the code, and the ability then to operate upon those instructions. So that's
Right.
like at least three hyper complicated things, really beyond human intelligence to figure out. Is there anything you would add to that? Because that analogy was very helpful for me.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I will add this. Starting a few years ago, I began seeing online several atheists who are not biologists or scientists claiming that the genetic code is not really a code, which is nonsense. Even Richard Dawkins, who is a biologist, and all other biologists say, "What are you, nuts? Of course it's a code. It works like a code." The letters you mentioned, ACG, by themselves, they're just letters, just like TREE. But they do stand for, okay, this is an instruction. When you get to this position on the protein you're making, put this amino acid there and no other. That's how we get all the right proteins made. And there's nothing about the ACG that has any chemical connection with that particular amino acid. So what the atheists were talking about is that this is pretty good evidence for God. And, you know, Stephen Meyer has written, I guess, 2 books already now about how the genetic code is so incredibly good evidence for a creator. Most recent is the Return of the God hypothesis, which I recommend. So when I saw that atheists were coming up with this, I had several debates online with some of them. And I realized that the whole thing is they don't want to accept the science. And, you know, we always hear from atheists that, oh, Christians, they don't like science. They don't want to accept science. But it's true for them. When there's some scientific fact, like the origin of the universe, there are atheists who are now saying, no, the Big Bang wasn't the start of everything. There was something else before that. That's just based on hype. That's not real. Mm-hmm. But it's very threatening to atheism to have a code in life, because if it's not a creator, if it's not a divine agent, where did it come from? You don't spontaneously find codes anywhere. Now, I heard one person say, well, tree rings are a code. They tell you how old the tree was. No, that's not a code. You can tell how old the tree was because you're a smart human being who knows that trees grow this way. And every time there's another year, it makes a ring. That's not a code. That's not an intentional, as you said, purposeful code to tell you what to do. That's just, that's just something you're seeing, you're observing.
Yeah. And it made me think, okay, which comes first? This very hyper-specific protein that operates as a machine, or the instructions to create the machine on there?
Well,
and those are just things I think that, from what I understand, there's no answer to at this point.
Yeah, there is not. And I think the way you put it is very good. We can look at ourselves. We make machines, but we don't just make random machines. We make machines for a purpose, and with codes and with, one of the things I tried to bring out in the book, and I don't know how well it came across because I'm fairly old, but when I was still a graduate student, some of the computers we used had slots where you would put punch cards in or tapes that would then be read. That's exactly how the protein synthesis system works. It's amazing. There is a slot in this structure in the cell where a tape that contains all the code literally goes through it physically, and every part of that tape is read and produces the protein. It's remarkable. It's just remarkable.
So we mentioned machines. That brings me to the other analogy, and it's funny because I don't remember if I read all of this in there or just my imagination went with it. But you were talking about a factory, So this is either your complete analogy or like me reading your book, having a burrito, having a dream. But this is ultimately what stuck in me. Think about having a car factory, okay? In a car factory, there's like, let's assume it's like the Tesla one where they just manufacture it and put it all together right on site. So you imagine having a car factory that has every single machine in that one factory to produce a fully functional car.
Mm-hmm.
But now inside that car is a factory with every single machine to produce itself again. And it's like that, like you're talking about something ridiculous when
Right.
when you try to imagine that, but that is literally every single cell
Yes.
in your body is not just a cell. It's a cellular factory to produce itself over again.
Right.
Meaning on a molecular level, the production instructions, all of the parts, the assembly of the machines of the
Right.
parts on a molecular level, and then those machines putting together the actual parts you need to make up the next cell. And it's like that degree of complication is not something that human beings have remotely approached.
That's right.
In the world with the combined intellect of everybody who's ever put together something.
That's exactly right. You got it perfectly.
All right. So
I guess I'm a better writer than I thought.
There you go. Yeah, you did well with it. So in your mind, you talk about, like in your book, you talk about intelligent design and how you don't really care for the term intelligent design. You have a different term that you like, and I'd love for you to explain that a bit.
Yeah, it can come right off from what you just said. The design of the way cells reproduce themselves, which involves something called the ribosome and the DNA and the genetic code and RNA and many enzymes, just an incredible process. That's not intelligent. That's way beyond intelligence. So I call it divine design. Now, I've spoken to some ID folks who are friends of mine, and yeah, they agree with me, but it's an old term, so they're not going to change it.
Right. Yeah.
But I like to say divine design, and I think that you can't deny it. I mean, you can't deny this basic fundamental feature of life is that it has all these amazing characteristics of design. And it's not just that. You'll probably get into this, but if not, I'll bring it up now anyway. What's really interesting to me, besides this part, because so far we've only talked about the first 3 chapters, but what's really striking is that we are now discovering, and these discoveries are not being made by Christians, they're being made by mainstream scientists, that life is unique in many other ways as well. And all you have to do is think about it. There's no agency in physics or chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
A volcano never says, I'm in a bad mood, I'm going to blow up. I don't like something. No chemical ever says, oh, I think I'll bond with that chemical. She looks nice. Things just follow the rules of physics and chemistry beautifully. That's very nice. Not true in biology. In biology, a bird can be sitting on the sand, standing on the sand, minding its own business, and then all of a sudden it flies off, circles around in the sky, comes down and eats some of the crumbs that I threw at it. I threw at the sand. That's called agency.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing in physics or chemistry explains why that happens. And now when I make that argument, I often get the response, well, it's the neurochemistry. There's things in there that there's no free will. Nothing has free will, not even humans. It's an illusion. Come on. The argument that there's no agency, that there's no purpose to anything that people do or other animals is another sign of the end of atheism, because it's so obviously false. I mean, it's just, so there's no free will. So why are we arguing? Why are you debating with me? What, there's no
Right.
purpose. What,
Yep.
okay, why are you here? Why are you not just, sitting in a swamp eating toads or something? I mean, it's insane. And
So
yeah,
when you give that analogy of a bird, or a human, it makes sense. But one of the things that was pretty fascinating to me, and I don't think I'd ever read anything like it before, you talked about this on a cellular level, like
yes,
single celled
right.
organisms that seem to have agency, purpose, and memory, um,
Cognition, right,
cognition. So can
right.
you explain that in a way that us
Well,
normal people can understand here?
that's the subtitle of the book is New Discoveries, how new discoveries of the science of life point to God. And that's what I'm referring to. And these are really new. This is research that's within the last 5 years or so. And that takes a long time to come out and reach the
Mm-hmm.
public. And most people don't, I didn't know about it. and many scientists don't know about it. Most biologists don't even know about it. Certainly none of the public does. And here's what it is. It turns out, and these have come from laboratory experiments. This is not theoretical stuff.
Okay.
Even bacteria and single cell creatures like amoeba and various molds act with agency and purpose. In other words, and the way they do that is they can sense their environment. And once they can sense, for example, the fact that there are many of them in one place, they can act on that in a way that makes sense. One example is, let's say there's something threatening this group of cells. Well, each cell can put out a little bit of poison, but a tiny amount, and that won't do anything
Mm-hmm.
to kill, the invader. But when they find out that there's a lot of them together, like a few 100,000, they all together at the same time coordinate and each one puts out a little poison, and that is enough to get rid of the invader.
Huh. It's crazy.
And not only that, but this is even more crazy. I agree. That's the best adjective. There was one experiment done with some cells that are able to change their metabolism if the oxygen level goes down. They're able to switch to a non oxygen based metabolism, so they survive. So what some researchers did was they took these cells and they raised the temperature a little bit, and then they lowered the oxygen level. And after they did that a few times, the cells had learned that when the temperature goes up, there's going to be an oxygen decrease. So
Huh.
let's switch now before it happens. Yes, that's an actual
Wow.
factual
Huh.
experiment. And we're talking about bacteria. No brains, no neurons.
So you're
We
talking
don't know
like,
how that
I'm
works, but
thinking
it
of
works.
Pavlov's dog,
Exactly.
where like they ring a bell every time they feed the dog, and then eventually they ring the bell and there's no dog food and the dog salivates.
Right.
And you're saying that this happens
In bacteria.
in bacteria.
Exactly. Because they have some way to sense the connection between the temperature and what happens afterwards, which is that the oxygen goes down.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen an explanation for how that works. There are some theories, but I can't go into them. That's very complicated. But it works. It happens. And so far, it appears that everything alive, all microscopic cells, all bacteria, everything, plants, certainly animals and humans, we know, they all have cognition, which they use to do things on purpose.
Hmm.
And this sounds like it's really way far out, right? But it's not. This is a book published by MIT Press 2 years ago, and it's called
Huh.
Evolution on Purpose. It's an incredible book. I recently had a review published on it. It's an incredible book written and edited by 20, 25 scientists, none of whom, as far as I know, are Christians. This is mainstream science. But the implications for Christianity, for God, for the implications for understanding the reality of creation are enormous, because we have no idea how that could have happened. We don't know how you could make a bacteria that, says, "Oh my God, the temperature went up. I better switch my metabolism, because you know what happens next? The oxygen goes down," right? We know that, folks, right? This this is a smart bacterium.
And so, all of this points to, if the smallest bacteria, the simplest bacteria, have purpose and have meaning, then it is not a major dot connector that they were made with a purpose, that they didn't just happen, that this is not a blind process, that this is not a chance process, that, like you said, this is divine design.
Yeah.
And so as we just try to think through this, there's so much other stuff we could talk about, but at some point they're going to have to actually read your book. For parents, how can parents talk to their children about science in a way that celebrates discovery, but also points to God, the creator?
That is a great question. And I think, and the reason it's such an important question is because it can be very hard to do that. One of the things that I and many, many friends and colleagues have devoted our lives to now is to destroy the myth that science and faith are not compatible.
Or that, like, science has disproved God.
Or the way especially that. And that's just completely false. There is nothing, there are some wonderful Christians who are excellent scientists, not just some, quite a few. And, how do they do it? They're not all crazy. When I first announced that I was following Christ, there were people who said, "Well, you lost your mind. You're insane. You have dementia, whatever." And that's completely ridiculous. And I'll tell you why. Because science grew out of Christianity. The science we know today, whether it's physics, chemistry, electricity, geology, even biology. Louis Pasteur was a devout Christian. Robert Boyle and Michael Faraday wrote as much about theology as they did about science. These were devout Christians. And what they knew, and then it got lost at some point, at the turn of the 20th century, what they knew was that science is the way we explore God's creation and understand it. It doesn't contrast the idea of God at all. So if you can communicate to your kids something along those lines, and there are some pretty good books out there that, can help. There's a couple specifically directed towards children, which I can tell you later, and you can put it.
I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah. But it's really important to try to get across this idea that we're facing problems on so many fronts. We can't even get started on that. But one problem that we've had for a long time, and it got really bad during the new atheist phase, is this idea that, you have to be defensive if you're a scientist who believes in Christ. And that's crazy, because that's the history. Everybody did then. So, how to tell you what to tell your kids is, first of all, you have to, if the child is in a school or a learning environment that is, not Christian, okay, let's say it's a public school where the teacher is telling you that science, this depends on the grade level, but where science and faith are not compatible, you just have to combat that. And, that can be done as I said, there are several good books that can inform adults and a few that can also be directed towards kids. It's become a field now, this idea of science and faith compatibility. So there's a lot of material. If it's just, you see, the reason this is complicated is because, there's all this idea that you can't bring up religion in a public school, right? Because it's separation of church and state, whatever. That's hard to deal with. But it's usually the teachers who bring this up. And if a kid will say, well, I went to church and they told me that God created everything. And the teacher says, well, church is wrong. We know it's all science that can explain that. Then you have, if that's what the kid tells you, you have to tell the kid, no, the teacher's wrong. There are scientists who know a lot about how everything is created, but they don't know all of it.
Yeah.
And the parts that are missing is where God is definitely involved. And those are not just little things. They're huge, like the origin of life, the origin of the universe, the nature of humanity. Those are not little tiny things.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were sharing, in the beginning of the Bible tells us who created it.
Right.
God created it. And in Revelation, there's this scene around the throne of God where I like how the King James says it. For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they were created. And so, okay, the beginning we have the who created it. In Revelation, we have the why it was created. It was created for God's pleasure, including you. And I think that's one of the neat things to tell a child. Like,
yeah, I like
you
that.
were created by God for God's pleasure.
Yeah.
And, science, when it's all said and done, science cannot tell us who did it, and it cannot tell us why.
Right.
But it's a fun exploration of how, like all of the different hows of God.
That's exactly right.
And it's, science's best guess along the way. Cause like the science is quantum physics, 200 years ago, you try to tell anybody about quantum physics, they would think you're a sorcerer.
Exactly.
And even now, like you explain it to me, it's like Harry Potter makes more sense than quantum physics. But again, I don't worry about who. I know the why, and like the exploration of science might at first toe in the water shake somebody's faith in God, but in truth, it should draw, like it did with you. An atheist from a communist background draws you into the wonder and awe of somebody who can design something far beyond anything that we could possibly imagine. And
Correct.
So I thank you for this. It was really exciting for me. It's fun to, as I have 3 teenagers in public schools right now, to be able to equip them for the conversations that they have. Science should not scare us. And, science should bring us into awe and wonder of God. And if there's something that they say that directly contradicts our faith, you don't have to be afraid of it. You just be like, just wait, the science will change.
That's right.
Because when it's all said and done, truth is truth. God made you, he made you for his pleasure. And hopefully when we get up to heaven, we get big brains and then have a really cool science lesson from God of how he did it all. So
that's definitely what I'm looking forward to. I have a whole list of questions.
Yeah. Sy, thank you so much. Beyond Evolution can be found on Amazon and every other place that books are sold.
Right.
And do you have a website or anything that you would point people to?
It's quite easy. It's just my name, sygarte.com.
Okay. SYGARTE.com.
And I have stuff about all my books and a lot of other, if people want to know who is this guy, how can he talk, I've got my whole CV on there. So everything is there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Good.